In this video, we're going to talk about 5 different traits that you can use to try to recognize whether you or someone else has autism. And I do want to have a little disclaimer here that this should not be a video that you use to diagnose yourself or someone else with autism. It's just to help you be more aware of the different behaviors that someone might have. So the first behavior I want to talk about is stimming. And stimming is just repetitive behaviors that autistic people use to help them manage their sensory input. And by sensory inputs, I mean the different things, the different stimuli in our environment, like visuals, sounds, smells, all the things that we pick up through our senses, our brain needs to process. And usually autistic people process that stimuli differently. And so it might lead to overwhelm or underwhelm. And so stimming is a behavior that we use to manage that. And so, for example, I often rock my legs back and forth, and that is kind of a soothing thing that I do. Other people might flap their hands, they might tap their finger on something. There's a whole bunch of different ways people might stim, but as long as it's that repetitive behavior that's helping soothe the self, that is stimming. I also wanted to note that I created a whole other video about stimming, so if you want to learn more, check that out. The second behavior that I wanted to talk about is that autistic people often need time to recharge, or they need time alone. As I mentioned, right, we might be overwhelmed by all the things that are going on around us, and so it helps if we can kind of escape that, go somewhere, be by ourselves for a little bit. And so one thing I actually do is when I'm going to a place where there's going to be a lot of people, I always find the bathroom first, because I know, I can just go to the bathroom, go to a stall if I'm feeling really overwhelmed and need a bit of alone time before I come back with the rest of the group. The third behavior I want to talk about is probably the most pronounced for me, at least, and so I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, and that is autistic people tend to have challenges with communication, or at least communicating in the way that's kind of deemed acceptable or the norm. And there's a lot of different facets of that. For example, someone might have trouble understanding nonverbal cues, or conversely, when they don't see nonverbal cues, like they're talking on the phone, that can be very uncomfortable and make it hard to communicate. An autistic person might struggle with sarcasm or taking things really literally. So for example, when I was younger, we had this activity in school called Drop Everything and Read. And the first time that we did that, I was kind of thinking like we were literally supposed to drop what we were holding and pick up a book. Don't do that. It also might look like not knowing exactly when it's your turn to speak. So either you stay silent or you awkwardly interrupt people in the middle of conversations. And these patterns of miscommunication might also look like other particular traits. For example, I mentioned not liking phone calls. It might also be a strong preference for written communication, so you can really think through your response and really think through what was told to you, and you can kind of consult other people, right? Am I supposed to take this literally? Is this figuratively? And it just gives you more time to process the communication that you are receiving. Another result of communication challenges might be that autistic people spend a lot of time scripting out what they want to say in their head before they have that conversation. And so there's been times when I had particularly difficult conversations where I would literally plan, I'm going to say this first. If they say this, then I'll say this. But if they say this, I'll say this. And so I had like a web of the conversation planned out in my head ahead of time. Another sign that someone might be on the spectrum is having intense special interests. And so that is really focusing in on and hyper-focusing on one particular thing. For me, when I was younger, that was hurricanes. I would literally watch the Weather Channel for like 8 hours straight, especially during hurricane season. And for me, when I became an academic, this looked like really wanting to only work on one project as opposed to all of my other projects. And if there was a project I was less enthusiastic about was due before another project, it was really hard for me to focus on the project that was not my special interest, even if it needed to be done first. And fifth, another characteristic of autism is really struggling to understand how other people are feeling or how other people are thinking. And this may stem from the miscommunication or the communication issues I mentioned earlier, but it can be very difficult for autistic people to understand what the intent is for people, what the motivation is for people. And this kind of lack of awareness about how other people might be thinking or feeling can lead to moments of kind of miscommunication where an autistic person sounds more aggressive than they mean to be, or autistic person takes a comment in a way that is much more hurtful than the person saying it intended it for it to be. And so issues with figuring out intent and being aware about that kind of thing can be a challenge for autistic individuals. And once we start learning how to recognize autism, looking for those kinds of behaviors, it then becomes important for us to try to create more inclusive, accessible conversations and spaces so we can avoid those miscommunications, that hurt that happens from lack of understanding about people's intent. And so check out my other video about how to create more inclusion for neurodivergent people and autistic people. As always, thank you so much for listening to this video about the 5 characteristics of autism. I always appreciate your support. Thank you so much.